Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the RASOR Center podcast. As a quick disclaimer, these views are our own. They do not reflect our institutions or anything of that nature. RASOR Center stands for Risk and Security Open Research Center. We provide open source IT and security research tailored to public agencies and municipalities to help them manage cyber risk better and implement technologies safer. Today, I have a special guest who has over 26 years of industry experience across many different IT domains, including cybersecurity, architecture, infrastructure, data privacy, software development, and risk management. Not only does this individual have a breadth of horizontal expertise, but has also supported and advised across many different industries, including healthcare, finance, real estate, energy, manufacturing, transportation, nonprofit sectors at million, billion, and trillion dollar public and private organizations. I view my guest as a peer, a mentor, and a friend. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mike Elkins to the show.
Yay, Kyrie, pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, man. How are you feeling today?
It's a beautiful day. The sun is out. All my appendages are working. I can't complain.
I feel that, man. So if you don't mind, we can just kind of start off with telling us how you got into cybersecurity, what sparked your interest in, I guess, IT, right? And I know that there's a lot of viewers who want to understand a little bit more about, the academic kind of path that they have to go down. And I know that you have kind of a unique one. So if you could get into that a little bit and just kind of share with us your story, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thanks for the invite. I've been in IT for 26 years. I do not have a college degree. I am a practitioner by training, and a lot of what I've stumbled into throughout my career has been figure it out, either self-taught or doing intense research or just being curious and asking a lot of questions. A lot of that stems from my early education career. So in third grade, I was a very hyperactive kid in Philadelphia public school. They had no idea what to do with me, so they put me in special needs classes. So from third grade till about 11th grade, I never followed a traditional education path. I never really learned how to learn. I never really followed what most people would have gotten in terms of education throughout their, primary years of school. So while that was a little bit of a downside, the benefit to that was life became a Montessori school for me, right? So it was very much figuring things out. I got to learn what I was curious about. I got to follow my passions and my curiosity at a very early age, which very quickly led me into technology. I remember being 7, 8 years old and constantly ripping things apart and putting them back together and trying to figure out how they work. That led into early days of school where we had computers. I was, hooked from day one, putting the old floppy disk into an old machine and playing Oregon Trail, or just trying to use the technology to figure things out. That led into my co-op in high school was as a payroll employee for the school district of Philadelphia. Didn't know a ton, but I was very curious and very much interested in learning. So my job in my co-op was to drive around to the different schools in the school district of Philadelphia and set up printers, teach teachers kind of how to use new software programs, more like help desk style support. Fast forward a couple of years later, I got a couple of other roles that were more in traditional engineering. So I've worked in telecommunications and cell phones and working with the network and towers. My first real break, I would say, came from a friend of a friend. So one of my best friend's brothers worked at a company called Siemens, very large multinational German conglomerate that had uncount number of different divisions and products and solutions that they would sell. So I started out doing VIP support for the Royal Bank of Scotland and their subsidiary for Citizens Bank. So I managed very white label, white glove support for VIPs, the executives, the boardroom. That also included helping set up the trade desks and the monitors. So I got to understand technology and finance very, very early on in my career, and I was always hooked. And a lot of that really came from, again, just trying to figure things out, ask the right questions, read the manuals, do the research, or just, on your own accord, you have a problem you don't know how to fix, you figure it out.
I have a quick question for you. So I want to just highlight something, right? Because there's a lot of viewers who are new to the IT world or new to the cybersecurity world. And there's a couple of things that you said that I think are important. Number one is that you have that curiosity, and number two, your foundation was in that sort of IT help desk sort of role. So can you talk a little bit about how the IT help desk role kind of prepared you for the transition from IT help desk, to a company like Siemens where you were doing, more engineering sort of work? What were the things that you were able to take away from the IT help desk role that kind of helped you in your new kind of like big break?
Yeah, I would say a lot of it is number one, the hands-on experience, right? Being tactile, having to get certified to repair printers when they break, right? Not knowing how printers work, but then having to fix them when they're broke. Something as basic as replacing little rollers that feed paper, a little bit more complicated of a deal. So it gave me a significant opportunity to have hands-on experience. The flip side of it is cybersecurity really wasn't a thing necessarily as like a label or a category, at least back when I really got deep into technology. But it really helped me reinforce the basics, right? So I got my A plus certification. I understood the hardware. I was always building computers, never really knew how to do it. You just kind of, you figure it out. So that really helped kind of get that hands-on experience, get a certification, get a couple of certifications with a different vendor here or there. But also, it really gave me a solid foundation of understanding how networks work, right? How IP addresses work, why there's different VLANs for a reason. Um, the other side of it, which I think is really important, and I think it's missed a lot in the technology world, is the soft skills, the people side of things. I've worked with plenty of engineers who are PhDs, world class, patents in their name, but they couldn't hold a conversation with another human being.
Yep.
I love people. I love having conversations. Hence, you asked me to do this podcast. I jumped right on it because it's important to have the people side of things. So working in an area where you're going into CEOs of the companies into their office to understand what's going on with their personal laptop, sometimes even to their house, right? Depending upon the level of support we needed to provide. It gave me that solid foundation of like the fundamentals, networking and hardware and software and how some of those worked and how they worked in a really, really large enterprise versus, small companies, which is kind of a different animal, but it's the same thing just at a much larger scale. So I would say those two things, right? The hands-on experience, again, that's really how I've learned my entire life is just very much get in, roll up your sleeves and figure things out. And then the people side of it was great because you get to meet interesting people, you get to talk about their job as you're fixing things, you make conversation. But what that also translated into is the next opportunity. And that's something that has been key throughout my entire career. I've had a number of roles in a number of different companies. We can touch on each one if you like. Um, but very seldom have I ever had to post for a job, an interview for a job. It's usually been a referral or a friend of a friend or a contact or somebody had pointed it out and said, hey, this is a good role at another company. Or when I'm within the same company. And when I worked at Siemens, I worked there for over 13 years. Siemens was bought out by Cerner, at least our division, because I wanted moving into healthcare. And then I stuck with Cerner Healthcare for the next 2 years and really helped with the mergers and acquisition side of the work that was being done. Um, and again, the networking has always been key and important to me. And that's something that still to this day, until the day I'm dead, I do my best to go to external conferences, right? Whether it's the big ones out in Vegas or San Francisco, or wherever they are,
Could you
but even
name?
local.
Sorry to cut you off, but could you
Yeah.
name a few of those conferences just for people who are viewing, who may not know what they are? And then I have a follow up question for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Most recently, some of the conferences I've been going to are Black Hat in Vegas, which is a fantastic opportunity. That's actually where corporates and non-corporate folks who are just curious and want to hack go there, and it's one of the largest hacker conferences in the world. In the early parts of my career, I would actually make part of my negotiation of onboarding for that company that I would go to one or two large conferences a year. They're usually a couple $1,000s. There's time, travel, and expenses. So I've been to VMworld, I've been to ConnectCon, out in Vegas with Black Hat. There's also DEF CON. I have not been to DEF CON yet, but cross paths with a lot of folks who were hosting and presenting at DEF CON. VMworld was a conference I went to back in 2014, 2015, right? One of the biggest conferences I'd been to at the time. It was all geared around everything in VMware's world. But even smaller local conferences, there's conferences that are put on by vendors like Zerto or Cohesity. Some of these names may or may not make sense, but they're products and solution sets that large enterprises look at.
Okay.
There's also local vendors in the area like resellers or consulting firms. They'll also host events. There's things all related around an entire day on cybersecurity. Other ones, like for example, when I went to a Zerto all-day conference years ago, this was, I couldn't even tell you how long ago, probably 15 years ago. But what I loved about that conference was at the end of the conference, you took a certification exam, and if you passed, you walked out with a certification for that manufacturer's product,
That's
right?
pretty
So
cool.
maybe it's not a
Like that.
grand old certification, but it's very much small little steps, right? Building them up over time. I'll pause there.
Okay. Kind of going off that point, especially the networking and sort of like preparing yourself. I think we did get a question on Instagram today when I was telling people that I was doing the podcast. You know, as a newcomer in like in this age and sort of like this job market, because you kind of mentioned that you've never really had to post for a role, right? As someone who's new to the industry and looking to get into IT or looking to get into security, what is it that they should be focused on, kind of like when trying to break in with no experience right now in 2024?
That's a great question. I would say there's no perfect answer. It's very much art and science, and it's also very much up to the individual and their personality and what they're comfortable with. I've made it a point to continue to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm more outgoing, I'm more verbose, I'm more comfortable speaking on large stages in front of many, 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 many people. But that was an evolution, right? I've gone to training for that. I've gone to public speaking classes, and it's just a lot of failure on my own part has led me to some level of success. So definitely find what works for you, what you're comfortable with, but don't be shy to push yourself beyond a little bit of a comfort zone. I can remember early in my days going to a happy hour event at work, and there'd be a couple hundred people all around, kind of chatting, and looking around like, shit, I don't know what to do here. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know what to say, and you try, right, and be okay and be kind to yourself when you make little slip ups or you talk too much, you don't say the right words, and you can see the person's body language. It's all part of the process, right? So I would say get in front of people wherever you can. In person is best. I know in the world of everything digital, right, between LinkedIn and Instagram and all the other social channels, there's definitely a whole reason to network and keep conversations going there. But show up in person. And over time, people will get to recognize who you are. You'll build relationships. And I'll say, friends that I have today are friends that I met at a conference that was a local conference or something 15, 20 years ago that are still really close, right? You get there, you meet with someone, you say hi, what do you do? What do you do? What are you interested in? Why are you here? What are you hoping to learn? Whatever that talk track is. And then you keep in touch, right? When you feel a connection, like when you and I started working together, right? There was almost like an instant connection of, hey, this person's pretty cool. It's got a lot of potential. Really interested in learning what he knows. Interested in sharing what I know. And don't be shy. I've It's hard for me to do at times, but I'm very much overcoming my own bullshit, right? To be able to be comfortable with a cold call to somebody to say, hey, I saw you posted this thing on Instagram or on LinkedIn. I want to learn more about that article. Can you give me a reference? And I'll say this goes back to I was probably a senior in high school. A little bit after that. This was after 9/11. There was a book that came out by a gentleman who was in the CIA, and his job was after 9/11 happened, he was boots on the ground as the first crew with Delta Force and operators to try to capture and kill bin Laden in the mountains of Tora Bora. It's a great book called Jawbreaker. His name's Gary Bernstein.
Yeah.
I reached out to him, so looked him up, and said, hey, really like what you did. Thanks for the book. Thanks for your service. That translated into him saying, oh, I'll be in Philly in a couple of weeks for a speaking engagement at the public library. You want to get together afterwards? And here I am at the end of the night having drinks with this gentleman and folks that were in his crew. And I'm like, I am so unqualified to be here. This guy speaks like 4 different languages fluently. He's just top of the world class people. Who am I to have a seat at the table?
Mhm.
Everybody has a seat at the table. And if you're at the table, you don't have to justify why you have a seat at the table. Take the seat at the table, network, BS, make some friends, don't put a ton of pressure on yourself, but just be curious and ask open questions.
Yeah.
I'll pause there.
So a couple of things there, right? And then we can kind of move on to the next topic. But a few things that you said there that were cool is like I've gotten job opportunities in the most strange ways just because like I'm willing to reach out to people and I'm willing to go to the furthest extent and embarrass myself. So there was this company that I wanted to work for. There was this guy on YouTube, I forget his name, but he owns like an ERP consulting company. And for the people who don't know what ERP stands for, it stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. And I was watching him on YouTube, and it was like more like a Lean Six Sigma kind of thing that he was doing, right? Going into businesses, figuring out how they could be more lean, how they could be more efficient, how they could automate things, and that appealed to me a lot. And so I reached out to him. I reached out to his CEO. This is the CEO of the company. I reached out to him on LinkedIn. I reached out to the COO on LinkedIn. I think I reached out to like one other person. I didn't hear anything back. So I figured out where their headquarters was, and I typed up a letter and I packaged it in the mail, and I put his name on it so when he got the message he would have to open it. Really well written letter, and they offered me a six-figure job after we had a couple rounds of interviews, and that's kind of like I feel like a lot of people just base their entire career acquisition strategy on LinkedIn. And in today's time where you have artificial intelligence and it's applying for resumes for you, when you go on LinkedIn and there's, 200 applications in the first 24 hours, right? Like you kind of have to deploy these different ways and different strategies that are kind of against the norm. Um, okay, so I had other things to say, but they'll come back to me.
Can I piggyback off that for a second?
Of course.
Because I think you're highlighting the art and the science to this, right? Um, I've done door drops. I've done literally showing up in an office and be like, hey, is Tom around? Can I speak to Tom or whatever? And fortune favors the brave.
Yep.
If you can do something a little bit different that stands out, three-piece suit, whatever your thing is that helps you stand out just a little bit more than the next person, you got to realize most of these people at a company, they're trying to hire for a couple of roles, but they're probably getting thousands, if not tens of thousands of applications. So, for example, if you're doing the LinkedIn route, don't just post for a job on LinkedIn. Find a recruiter, reach out to the recruiter, reach out to somebody that you may know that's already in that organization, hopefully get an employee referral. But yeah, what you're describing there is very much the art side of thing. And if you are comfortable with being uncomfortable and you're okay with putting yourself out there a little bit, I mean, the sky's the limit. I'll go back to a story from Steve Jobs. He said very early in his career when he was a young man, I think it was Hewlett Packard, he reached out to like the CEO of Hewlett Packard, literally looked him up in the phone book, called him and said, hey, I'm trying to build this device. Do you happen to have any parts that you could give me? And that wound up, not only did he get the parts, I think he got like a summer internship at HP or whatever the company was. That's not going to be a story for everybody. But if you are comfortable and brave enough to get past your own internal critic and self doubt and all those things and take that initiative, handwritten letters go a long way. You go through an interview, a handwritten note to the hiring manager or the executive of the company. You'd be surprised how little things like that give you a quantum leap advantage over some of the other folks that are just AI generated a resume and clicking posting for this job, posting for that job. Being a little bit more of a sniper approach versus a shotgun approach. From my experience, you fail more, but your successes are also much bigger.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. The other two questions that I had for you came back to me, and I'm going to say both of them so I don't forget. But the first one is we talked about the art, but the science part is something that I want to get to from like a technical perspective as a foundation. What are the things that you need to know if you want to start like wiggling your way into this industry? Um, I won't say the other one because I forgot that one again. So
When it comes
you
back
start
up,
there.
let me know.
Yeah.
So from a technical perspective, there's
Sorry,
some
sorry,
found.
I just remembered. The other thing that I wanted to say is I see you as someone who's a mentor to me, right? And a lot of people ask me to mentor them. A lot of people want to understand. They think that there's this thing that you have to be like qualified to have a mentor. So my second question for you is like, as someone who is a mentor, what makes you want to mentor someone? Like, what makes you want to engage with someone and say, I want to give this person my time? for nothing in return to, give them advice or help them progress in their career, or just give them a few pointers on like how to navigate the environment that we're in. So that's my second question.
That's a good question. I'll start with the second question since you almost forgot it. From a mentor perspective, I would say sometimes there's an intuitive sense. That was something that you and I picked up, when you started and, came up, introduced yourself. There's some intuitive sense there. I don't know karma, I don't know energy, whatever you want to call it, but there's something intuitive that's like, hey, he's a sharp dude. Hey, he's going to go places. Hey, he's very eloquent the way he speaks. He can jump into a room and talk about what needs to be talked about with confidence. So there's definitely an intuitive sense. Lack of the intuitive sense, or when that's not present, everybody's time is finite, right? So it's not like you're going to want to mentor a million different people. I love helping people because of my upbringing and my background and my family life and the way I kind of grew out through my career. Being a practitioner and experiential learner, a lot of that has come by way of mentors. When I started an early job, I was in a role with people who had patents and PhDs, and they've been in the company for 30 years. And I'm like, I don't have a college degree. I've been here like 3 years. I'm now moving into a role that's like way outside of my pay grade and comfort level. And you just ask a lot of questions. And then as you are brave enough to ask those questions, sometimes those relationships form, and that just grows into much bigger. Another thing I'll say is when you're looking at somebody that comes to you to be a mentor, right? They're saying, "Hey, I like what you have to offer. I want a mentor." It comes down to like, what do you both? Because it's not one way. What do you both hope to get out of the mentor relationship? Knowledge sharing, networking, learning a specific process, tool, or technology, and having that kind of alignment on what both sides of the mentoring conversation want to get out of it helps you align very quickly. But also, I've had mentees, I've been a mentee to other folks where it just doesn't feel quite right, right? You'll go through a couple of meetings, either you're busy in a million different directions or they're busy in a million different directions. It's okay to say, hey, thank you for your time. I'm going to move on to something else. So just because you have a mentor doesn't mean you need to, be with that mentor throughout your entire life. Throughout my career, I've had countless mentors, officially and unofficially, that have really helped propel me to my career. And I think mentorship is key. And I think very much what you're doing here with RASOR is to kind of have a podcast version so that if those folks don't have the mentors actively in their life, they can listen to the stories like this and say, here's how somebody else has done it. Here's how somebody else could have done it. And you take the best pieces of that and figure it out. I will say, as with technology and risk and all the things we're talking about, as well as the mentoring, everything, there's an art and a science to it, right? So you're going to have to kind of find your way through what you're comfortable with, what works for you, what worked for your mentor. But don't be shy about trying to build mentor-mentee style relationships with people that are well outside your comfort zone. Executives, principals in companies, CEOs of companies, maybe smaller companies, even folks at really big companies. Whether it's a official mentor relationship where you're having dialogue and conversation, or it's just, some chat support every once in a while. There's a lot of different styles of mentoring, but I think that mentoring is a key component, and it's something that I will always look for because I look kind of as everybody as being a mentor to me, but it's also something I want to give back, and I think that's a really important component.
Yeah, I 100% agree, man. It's like, and like, I've always been good with not feeling a sense of imposter syndrome because I understand that the value comes from being able to ask the right questions. So even if you don't have the answers, or even if you're not an expert, or even if you're not like any job that I start, if I'm the new person there and I don't really know what's going on, I'm the person that's asking questions that are that provoke ideation and other people and maybe like new ways of doing things. And that's like immediate value that I can add to any conversation is just because I'm inquisitive. So I 100% agree with you there. Last question that I have for you on this kind of like phase one of the podcast. I'll probably split this into two different podcasts because we kind of talked about careers for the first half. I do want to get into some of the more high speed stuff, I guess you can call it. But the last question that I want to ask for this section is, in terms of like technical skills that people need to develop in order to get into this industry, whether that's IT, whether that's cybersecurity, I kind of see them as kind of the same thing, right? Like IT security, you need to know IT. But in terms of education, in terms of certifications, like, do you think that college is mandatory, or do you think that college is, something that people should take into a, hold at a high regard? Do you think, what are some certifications that you think people should get, and what are some hands-on things that people should know how to do in order to, call themselves like a practitioner in this industry?
Yeah, so I think this piggybacks off of the prior question you were asking around like technical foundation. Um, I'll touch on just general technical foundations and then we'll step up to certifications. From a foundational perspective, you got to understand networking. You don't have to be a Cisco rep, you don't have to have your CCNA or CCIE, um, but having the foundations of networking, because at the end of the day, this is how everything communicates together, right? And understanding what a 192 IP address is and how that is different from, 10.5.4. Understanding routers and switches and firewalls, again, the infrastructure components, having that really basic solid foundation. I'll say that if you have an opportunity to tour a data center, absolutely tour a data center. Understand how data centers work. What's the importance of things like power rack and cool? What's the importance of things like fire suppression and why you need fire suppression and how there's different styles of fire suppression, right, in a data center. Um, they don't use water, right? Because water ruins the electronics. They use halon gas. So when I used to work in a data center, we had a 30-second time window that if the alarm went off, get the hell out because within 30 seconds, the halon gas sucks all the oxygen out of the room and you're not going to survive. So build up that solid foundation of networking. If you're really, really entry level, right? You're somebody in high school, you're curious, you're somebody who's entry level starting university, things like your A plus, your Net plus, your Security plus, the CompTIA certifications are really good. One of my crux, though, and we'll touch about this on the certifications, is I've typically gone for all the education, but I could care less about the actual piece of paper, right? Telling me I passed an exam. I took my CCNA course at Bucks County Community College way, way back in the day, paid all the money out of my own pocket, but I never took the CCNA exam. I didn't need the certification. For me, it was the hands-on knowledge of being able to mess with firewalls and switches and understanding how that stuff worked. So there's some components of that. I'll step up a little bit more from the certification perspective. This is where following your passion and your curiosity, I would say start with that, right? What the world of technology and cybersecurity and infrastructure is massive. There's a million different roles, even within the space of cybersecurity. There's almost an incalculable number of roles that are there or that will need to be there. So if you get the really solid foundations of understanding data center, network, hardware, software, how those things generally work would be great. If you can get experience a little bit more with software development and understand how that works, you don't have to be a coder. I am not a coder. I've been in IT 26 years and I've written a handful of lines of code through training. Never wanted to go down that path. I was always curious about it, but my role always took me in other different directions and always had to learn what I had to do at my job. So then stepping up to the certifications again, there's some big certifications. For example, right now I'm studying for my CISSP. It's your equivalent of a master's degree in cybersecurity. It's a hard test. I've already failed the test one time. So I'm taking the second attempt. I don't mind failing and keep trying because these tests are meant to make you fail. They trick you with a lot of the questions and you think you know the answer, but you're answering it as an engineer when you should be answering it as a manager or director. So CISSP is great, but you don't need a CISSP, right? You can go online and you can look at YouTube and you can look at what the CISSP training prep work is, and you can kind of just figure out what works for you and what's knowledgeable for you. Boot camps are great. I think boot camps, whether you do a certification or not, boot camps are an accelerated way to get hands-on experience, to get your hands dirty, to ask an instructor back and forth questions. I always absolutely love them.
I want to make a
There's,
quick comment. I want to make a quick comment on that because a lot of
please.
people ask me about boot camps. A lot of people ask me, there's boot camps that are at a wide range of sort of like financial commitment, and a lot of people ask me about the validity of boot camps. And a point that I want to make is if you're going to go to a boot camp, you can't necessarily go into a boot camp with the expectation that the boot camp is what's going to get you the job. You have to
Correct.
go into the boot camp with the expectation that the boot camp is going to give you specific knowledge around a particular subject, and that is going to enhance the likelihood that you can get a job because you're more qualified to speak on certain things, and you have, an educational foundation in a particular topic. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there for the viewers as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Again, there's a lot of art and science to this. Just because you go to a boot camp or just because you go to a certification prep doesn't mean you're going to pass. When I failed my CSSP the first time, I went to a boot camp a month before I took the test, and I still failed the test. Now, a lot of that's on me. I didn't put enough time and effort into studying the first time, but that's okay. But a lot of it too is when you go to these boot camps or you take, for example, your AWS Cloud Practitioner certification. You can take it. I think entry level, most people come out with a salary of like 50 or 60 grand if you have an AWS cloud practitioner certification. But that's like entry level, right? That basically says you can speak the lingo of AWS. You can understand S3 storage and object storage and file storage and what's used where. You can have a more intelligent conversation in an interview or in the job, right? So going through those even entry level certifications, for me, a long time ago, I took my VMware data center virtualization certification, right? So I was basically certified in all things VMware to be able to manage my own data center or build it out for other customers. There's so many other products or solution sets. There's Azure, there's Google Cloud, there's Oracle Cloud, there's IBM Cloud. You can look at each one of them and figure out what excites you, and take one of those exams or take one of those boot camps. But at the end of the day, again, from my experience, I'm not saying this is good for everybody. You don't always have to take the test, right? Being able to know the lingo and the language, self-studying, asking the right questions, as you keep doing that over and over throughout your career, and for me and you, right, I'm infinitely curious. I never, ever stop learning. Every single day, I'm in a book or I'm online or I'm watching a video, I'm doing something to increase my knowledge. When you do that year over year, month over month, you've got your foundation just continues to be a much bigger wall of what you can provide companies or individuals in your service offerings or how you want to get into the technology space.
Got you. Thank you for that. All right, so I've been waiting for this part of the conversation to start because you recently introduced me to this idea around cyber psychology. And I didn't know that it was called that prior to you introducing it to me, even though it was what got me interested into the cybersecurity space. I just didn't know that's what it was called. So like, I'll let you actually introduce it. Like, the first thing I want you to understand is, or the first thing I want you to explain to our viewers is, as a prerequisite to this conversation, what is the difference between information security and cybersecurity? And then if you could also introduce the concept of cyber psychology and sort of how those three worlds relate, I think that would be a really good introduction into the rest of this discussion.
Yeah. So I'll touch on your question around information security and cybersecurity. Cybersecurity typically falls under the cyber domain, the digital world, the digital domain. If you were to look at information security by itself, that would include digital data, but information security also includes physical pieces of paper, backups, tapes, things that are recovery. So there's a lot more from a pure information security that goes into anything that is critical or sensitive for an organization. And a lot of organizations, yes, they have a ton of digital footprints, digital data, digital devices, but there's still a lot of paper that's out there too, right? Carbon copies of purchase orders. When you get into the world of technology, technology is an enabler of the business, right? The technology is there to help the business itself thrive, succeed, serve their clients and customers in a more rapid manner, automate some different things. So technology is not the be all end all. One of the things that I've learned throughout my career is, yes, I'm a technologist. Yes, I'm a nerd at heart. I love this stuff, but I also love business. I love understanding when I'm going into a company to talk about a consulting gig, I'm understanding that company. I'm looking at their SEC filings online. I'm looking at their shareholder letters from their CEOs. I'm looking at whatever I can find on LinkedIn or any other area so that I can understand about the company, what the company wants to do, what the company does, where maybe their goals are in the short or long-term future, whatever you can find out. because the technology is just there to help drive that business. Now, in the past, technology was always considered what we call a cost center to the business, right? So to the business, you'd have to have this entire technology division and they would have to write that check. And I always looked at it as, why am I paying these folks? Well, you're paying us because we are able to build infrastructure and architecture and applications and systems so that you as a business can scale to serve clients across multiple states or multiple countries so that you can serve your clients in a much more rapid way. So there's a big difference there between kind of information security and cybersecurity, right? But at the end of the day, it would be beneficial for the folks who are listening to this podcast or anybody that's trying to break in. Don't just stay in the technical space. Understand what the technical is doing. Understand if you're on a technical project, why are you on that project? What are the business goals and business objectives? What is something that's personal to your manager, your director, your executive that's driving them spending the dollars and the people resources to do the work? If you can understand that, the technical you'll continue to pick up. I mean, I've never gone into a job knowing everything I need to know for the job. A lot of what I've done is just hands-on learning. And a lot of companies are okay with that. They want to know that you have some solid foundation and understanding. They'll put you in the role, and it's a two-way test. You're testing the company to make sure it's a role you want to be in, it's a company you want to stay with, it's something that you want to be with for maybe long term. But they're also testing you to make sure you're a right fit for the role, you're a right fit for the culture, things like that. So be okay with if you started a job and you're there a year and you're like, this is just not for me, or I found something else I'm more passionate about. Like, be okay with making that move.
Yep. So, in terms of, so everybody understands, cybersecurity is a subset of information security. Information security can include physical paper. It can include, anything that is physical, right? But when we talk about this idea of cyber psychology and the information that you are ingesting into your mind, whether that is through peer to peer a person speaking to you, or whether that's through a digital channel, I think that we live in a world now where having the security to understand that the things you are seeing is real is becoming less and less of a luxury. So I can see you smiling because I know you like getting into these sort of topics, and I do as well. But if you could sort of just introduce the idea of cyber psychology, because before you introduced it to me, it's like I had this desire to like learn about whatever that thing is. I just didn't know that it was called that, and I didn't know that there was even a place to practice that, and I didn't know that there were people who like do that as their job. So if you could explain what cyber psychology is to the viewers, I think that would be great.
So I'll start with how I learned about cyber psychology. That was a new terminology to me just in the past few years. Prior to that, I never really knew it existed, didn't know it was an academic research program. I didn't know that people were getting degrees in cyber psychology. I was irrelevant to it. Now, what I did understand is everything you do in technology and in cybersecurity is all centered around the human, right? There's this whole concept of human-centered design and human-centered cybersecurity, which is at the end of the day, the technology, the digital devices, those are all there to enhance the life of the human or the business of the human side of the business. So I learned about it through my network, right? I built a pretty vast, robust network. I'm very curious. I'm always following up with people a couple times a week. Hey, how you doing? What are you working on? What's exciting? When I'm at conferences, hey, what are you on the cutting edge? I've always tried to stay on the cutting edge, and it's flipping hard to stay on the cutting edge of technology that is on such a rapid transformation. So what is cyber psychology? I will say that, and I probably won't do it justice. Google it, right, for the folks out there in the know that they get a really good, solid understanding. But cyber psychology is the understanding of the behavioral side of technology. For example, if somebody responds to a phishing email, and that person is what we would coin as a repeat clicker. They're a person who doesn't just fail an October security awareness phishing test once, but they failed it every year for the last 10 years. That person puts the organization at risk, right? Because they can click on something that pulls malware, whatever the case may be. Cyber psychology looks at the behavioral side. It looks at the psychology side of how a human can be manipulated, how positive psychology can benefit folks as they're in a security operations center dealing with a massive problem. Um, Being mindful and aware of things, being able to pause before you click on a link and saying, was this the right link? That all comes down to psychological traits. It comes down to your upbringing, your experience. Do you have ADD, or are you a PhD and you're super arrogant? All those things come down to what translates ultimately into the digital space. So it's a combination of psychology and technology, and it's really there's a complex interplay between the two areas that is branching off into so many different folks. And I've been fortunate to meet a lot of academics as well as industry and government folks over my career. And it seems like the academics are really on the cutting edge of the whole cyber psychology, but it's really understanding what makes people tick. I mean, at the end of the day, it's applying textbook psychology principles to the world of technology. Now, what I'll add to this is the bad guys are also using this, right? So the bad guys are using textbook college psychology to manipulate, to deceive, to steal, to get somebody to be an insider threat. And they understand that everybody has personality, right? You can do your Myers-Briggs type indicator or strength finders, whatever the thing is, to understand a little bit about how you are. But the bad actors are also profiling you, your kids, the executives at your company, and they're building an attack profile to understand how they can deceive you or manipulate you as an individual to do bad acting on their behalf. You may not even know it. And it's a really interesting field because I've always been interested in psychology. I've always been interested in things like body language, micro expressions, what makes people tick. Um, and now translating this into a much more academic world and being part of conversations, helping develop new frameworks for NIST and other areas around human-centered cybersecurity, I'm realizing that the psychological side of technology is a much bigger piece of the puzzle than I would have ever known 3, 5, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy because one of the things so one of the things that I want people to understand is number one, you just said that there are frameworks being worked on for this stuff. So I want to understand, like, I want to help people understand the magnitude. Like, it's not just some like woo woo thing. The second thing is, the question I have is, what is really the difference between cyber psychology and like social engineering or like cyber like security awareness? I'm sure they have a very close relationship, but like, what would you say, if any at all? What would you say is like the distinct difference between those two realms?
I would say that they overlap, right? They're having an understanding of the foundations of psychology, right? Machiavellian traits, why people deceive, why people lie, why people steal, would translate into some other things. Understanding why somebody is a repeat clicker. When you look at a repeat clicker and you break it down, it comes down to some psychological components, right? Maybe it's a need to feel loved. Maybe it's a need to feel like they're doing something good. So they'll be very quick to respond to an email that asks them to wire money to this division or this routing number and not actually take a step back or not actually. One of the big overarching themes that I find when I look at cyber psychology, and I never thought I would understand this as a thing in technology, but being mindfulness in the world of cyber psychology translates to, meditation and, taking long walks outside. All that is about mindfulness as well. But in the world of technology, being mindful is taking a pause before you click on a phishing email, inspecting that email to make sure it's right. Or, and sometimes this has to happen, it's picking up the phone and talking to the person saying, hey, I just got this email. Does this look right?
Yeah.
That comes down to some psychological components of, is that person okay with putting themselves out there and picking up the phone, or do they have some sort of an internal critic or self-doubt that that would be the right thing or that they may get in trouble? I would tell you, if that's the case, I would rather be wrong and have somebody yell at me for picking up a phone and calling than clicking on something and then putting the company on the news.
Yeah, I think that's the big distinction there that you made, at least in the way that I understand it, is that cyber psychology is sort of like the root of security awareness. So when I think about security awareness and like what it means to install a security awareness program, I think data, I think metrics, I think right like phishing tests and things of that nature. But the cyber psychology aspect of that is taking that data a layer deeper and saying why are we seeing these anomalies? Why are we seeing these trends with this particular individual or this group of individuals? And it's an interesting point that you made that the adversaries are thinking about those things too, and they're using them to build out these very elaborate campaigns. And I think, you know, I don't think people understand, at least newcomers, and I'm saying this because I didn't understand this until, a few years ago. When you think about cybersecurity sort of in this vacuum, um, I don't, I want to shed light on how complex this like the information warfare that we're seeing right now is. And how do elements of psychology play into that with like national security? How do elements of social engineering and propaganda, like how do all of those things sort of tie in with information security? And what are some of the effects that you see it having on our society today in real time, that maybe on the surface might not be tied to a cyber attack or an information warfare attack? I'd really be interested to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so you bring up a really good point, and I'll say that I live in complexities, right? I thrive in chaos and complexity. Um, I feel like I'm in kindergarten every single day, and I've been doing this 26 plus years, right? I struggle sometimes to stay ahead of the curve and understand this stuff because it's complex, it's large, and it is evolving at such a rapid pace. It is unfathomable, and I mean that sincerely. I'll use one example is the bad actors are using textbook cyber psychology and psychological traits to poison or manipulate AI models. So being able to use a level of, Machiavellian psychology to trick an AI large language model so that you are actually injecting false positives or false data that now becomes part of its data set. That
So
is
it's like
real.
a SQL injection, but you're using psychological tactics in order to
Yep.
establish that exploitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one thing I'll say is, and I'm trying not to speak in hyperbole by any means when I say this, humanity is at a very unique time right now. We are at some of the most amazing things in the world of technology and livelihood and economics, but we are on a razor thin margin of falling off a cliff into some really serious, tumultuous times. Um, Not the likes that I think most people have any idea of truly what's going on out there. Um, Go ahead.
I was going to say I'd like you to share more insight because like this podcast is the place where we can like I want to be able to talk about this stuff. You know what I mean? So if you could share with the viewers, your thoughts on, what that cliff looks like, what falling off of it looks like, and maybe how we can sort of stay on and move to the other side towards safety.
So
I
some
know
of the
that's
things I may say, yeah, no, and I'm going to be candid about what I'm going to say. I'm not going to pull any punches because I think the brevity and seriousness of where we are calls for it. I will say that sometimes, I feel like a little bit of I'm screaming the sky is falling or running around like a chicken without a head or wearing a tinfoil hat sometimes. But everything I say is backed up by data and evidence, whether it's data from publicly available or privately, available information with those in the know. I'll give you a couple of overarching themes that have potential. Now, I hope that this never happens. I will die a happy man. But what's going on right now are things that affect our grandkids, grandkids, grandkids. And these are thousand-year chess moves that are being moved geopolitically, right? So if we talk about economics for a second, and I'll touch on just a couple of things high level to give you maybe an overarching picture, talk upon economics. There is a real, true effort by our nation state adversaries to do what they call de-dollarization, to basically make the US dollar no longer the world's reserve currency. That in and of itself has a potential. Between our debt now, I think we're at like 35 or 36 trillion dollars in debt. We spend, I think, like $1 trillion a month in interest only payments to get to our debt. We're very close to spinning out of control from a debt cycle. Um, our dollar is no longer backed by the gold since 1974 or whatever it was, right? So the US dollar is really at the good faith and support of the United States government.
So let me ask you a question there. Um, in terms of information warfare, right?
Yes.
How, like, can you explain sort of that campaign and add the element of like how does information technology play in that role of that sort of attack?
Yeah. So if we focus on the de-dollarization and how technology plays a role, Bitcoin, blockchain, digital currencies being able to very quickly and rapidly displace what the world reserve currency is. You can have private blockchain channels. You can have public blockchain channels. All those, if you get a number of countries that want to get together and decide that they're no longer going to trade in the U.S. dollar and they want to trade in local currencies or they want to trade in Bitcoin, it's going to take a long time for that to unravel, but that's exactly what's happening right now. There's a group called BRICS, and it's a combination of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I think there's 22 other nations that are part of BRICS organization, and if you go online and just looks up BRICS de-dollarization, there has been a continual effort over the last couple of years to displace the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. Now, how the cyber psychology and information warfare side comes to is it's really difficult to tell now what is misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, or just flat out BS, right? Versus what's factual. So the bad actors are manipulating people through news articles, through social media channels. They're getting people in certain levels of a company or a government where they will make sure that the feed of the digital news stories or YouTube videos that they get are things that kind of maybe instill some fear on the collapsing of the US dollar or instilling fear on this war, that war, whatever the case may be. It's not that hard to do. It really isn't to find some information warfare. Um, so we'll switch topics for a second because the other one I think is really interesting is into the cyber psychology side of it. But if you use a virtual reality headset, I'll give you a perfect example of information warfare and cyber psychology. Some of these new headsets are fantastic. I mean, the user experience is absolutely phenomenal. I can't wait to see how these things are used for augmented reality to help people who are repairing an HVAC system see where all the cables and colors are, so they know how on the fly how to be very proficient at what they're doing or fixing things the right way. But a virtual reality headset takes in an astronomical amount of data about that user. They look at your pupil dilation. They look at the fleshiness in your face. There's other devices that can look at things like your heartbeat and your sensors. The bad actors can take that profile of you and manipulate you. And the way that they can do that is they can determine, for example, if somebody is wearing a virtual reality headset and there's a beautiful woman, right? They can tell that that person is sexually aroused by that person because of pupil dilation, heart rate variability, breathing, how they're breathing, heavy or soft, do they get flesh in the face? And they can then weaponize that against you to create synthetic avatars that, if you're on a dating app, they can make 10 or 15 fake dating profiles and have them all target an individual or a group of individuals. So being able to use the data that's out there today from an information warfare perspective, I mean, look, I think it's at this point, I don't know what terminology to use, broken arrow, FUBAR, whatever the case is, but I think it's safe to say that just about everybody in America, I don't care how old you are, your data is stolen, your information is out there. If you forget your social security number, you don't need to worry about it. It's on the black dark web, right? It's out there forever. So knowing that we are at a point where operating as a total, complete, and utter compromise of every digital piece of data that every human has, I think is a good foundation to start from. Because once we know things are really bad, it's easy to start building up from there instead of always trying to patch holes here and there. Um, for example, with the information warfare side, if you, let's see, I'm trying to think of another good example. If you are into Star Wars, right? You're just a Star Wars nerd or you're a Star Trek nerd, and you go to the conferences and do things. Bad actors are going to look at your profile. They're going to see that you're into there, and maybe you're a VP for a company, or maybe you're a senior software engineer, and you could insert some couple of lines of code that maybe steal something or do some bad things or bring down the company. What they'll do is they'll identify your weaknesses using the psychological traits. They will build a profile on who you are and what makes you tick. And then they will exploit that profile. And sometimes that may even mean that they're going to send somebody who's dressed as, a Star Wars character to the next Star Wars conference to get close to you and to build a relationship with you. So that maybe not now, but in a couple of years, they can get in there to start manipulating you because they've built that relationship, which seems to be a trusting relationship.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think is really important for people to understand is like when you think of cyber attacks or when you think of information warfare, any of these things, right? It's really easy to have the perception that these things kind of like happen in a flash or happen in an instant, right? Like because when they do happen, right, and the risk actually does materialize, it seems like everything is happening at one time. But the sort of like iceberg to that, right, underneath the surface is could be years of research, years of profiling, years of testing, years of data gathering, years of reconnaissance. Um, and I just think that that's something that's really important to kind of bring to light is like these things don't just happen in an instant. These things happen because there's a force or there is a adversary that has a goal and they create a plan, right? The same way that you create a plan to go and try and get a job, right? The same way that you create a career roadmap and you start to profile the type of companies that you want to work for and the type of positions that you want, and who you need to go and speak to. And you might go on LinkedIn and see what school they went to so you can try and build rapport, right? There's that, but like times a thousand with all of the information that we have on people. And these campaigns can happen over a very long time span. If you look at our international adversaries, right? Like these campaigns have been going on for 10, 20, 30 years, right? So it's like yeah, I think that that's just something that's also really important to bring to the conversation, just the time horizon that these things can happen on.
I think that's a really important point, right? Because folks who maybe are newer to the world of technology or trying to break into cybersecurity, they'll be involved in an incident. Maybe they work in incident response. And something will pop, something will happen. Oh my God, world's on fire. You go through and you address whatever that world on fire thing is. You do the resolution, and then you do some sort of a root cause analysis to determine what happened and how it happened so that we can prevent it in the future. In my experience, almost every single time something like that happens, it's typically a calamity of errors over a long period of time that led to that final thing. Now, sometimes it's very simple, right? MGM Graham, when they got breached, was a year and a half ago, cost them $110 million. It was like a 17-year-old kid who picked up a phone, called the help desk, and wound up getting password reset and credentials. That in and of itself took 15 minutes to actually get to the final thing. But what you're not seeing behind the scenes is the years of recon on the company, the years of understanding how to act like that employee, how to know how to sound like that employee as you call those companies. Even, psychological principles, the person on the other call, I'm sure they were nervous. 17-year-old kid calling a, billion-dollar company to try to do some bad things. You've got to control your breathing and your voice and how you come across, because you want to come across as a friend, not a foe. And a lot of times breaches or cyber attacks, in technology and cybersecurity, we rely heavily on what we call defense in depth, right? So if you look at, if I use a physical world example, a castle, and typically a castle has a moat, and then you've got a drawbridge, and then you've got a lot of land in front of the castle. Then once you get past the castle walls, you've got typically, people living there, houses and pilgrimages. And then in order for you to get up to the king's room, in order to be able to slay the king, you have to cross a significant amount of barriers of entry. Technology is the exact same thing, right? It's not as simple as just doing one thing. It typically takes a methodical approach, a lot of trial and error, You got to clean up your tracks if you're doing bad things. Not all bad actors are good at cleaning up the tracks. It's how they get caught. But it's always a calamity of errors, time over time over time. And what also happens is when you work in a cybersecurity world, or just an operations world, most of these companies are inundated with alerts. They'll have all these different hardware and software programs that will look at internet traffic and web traffic and user traffic and all these other things. And what happens is a lot of companies get alert fatigue.
Yep.
Alert fatigue is where you'll get, this alert at 9 o'clock every day, and they're like, oh, that just is normal business operations.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not normal business operations. Somebody's doing some bad shit. You didn't catch it, and it's going to stay there and persistent until they get to the next level and do the next bad thing. Hopefully, you'll catch the alert then. But a lot of these companies, they get so many different alerts, and they don't necessarily always know what do they have to take action on versus what is normal business operations versus what is something that could just be somebody being curious and poking and prodding in their environment. And when it gets to the root cause analysis on some of these things, sometimes we just don't know. Stopping it, we just don't know, isn't always good enough, right? Because if you don't know now, how are you going to know next time when it gets worse?
Yeah, I think a really interesting point there that you made was the alert fatigue. And in terms of like kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation about the career market, I think that that's the value of the entry level role that's being overlooked is to have that fresh pair of eyes coming into your company. Maybe they don't know everything, right? But they're going to come into your company. They're going to be trying to learn. And, when these alerts or whatever go off, they're going to feel that responsibility because it's their first time role to investigate. And they're going to have that urgency because they don't want to do anything wrong. And I think that, I think in the current job market right now, that's something that a lot of companies really miss is sort of having that entry level person that might not know as much, but that can come into your company and just be that like fresh set of eyes and poke around and ask kind of like more thought provoking questions to maybe help you to refocus your attention on some of the things that you haven't been focusing on as an organization from a security perspective. So yeah, but anyways.
I'm gonna give it an analogy on that one real quick, just to hopefully
Please.
it'll resonate with your audience, because I think that's a really important component. And it comes back to the cyber psychology side of being comfortable and brave enough to speak up and say, I'm not quite sure this smells. But I'll give an analogy that I've heard years ago that makes a lot of sense to me, and I'll do it very quickly. The analogy effectively was, the family has their annual ham roast once a year. They get everybody together. And for decades, they would always cut the end of the hams off and put them sideways and then put the ham in the oven. And it was something that the grandmother knew. It was something like the grandmother passed down to the mother passed down to the daughter. And the daughter finally asked one time, why do we cut off the ends of the ham? I don't understand that. No, my mom had done it, so it's something that we always do, right? It's the disease of we've always done it this way. Long story short, after the girl was asking all the questions back to the mom and the grandmom, it turns out that when the grandmom was cooking Thanksgiving dinner or the ham dinner many years ago, her oven was a tiny oven. So they had no choice but to cut the ends of the ham off so that the whole ham would fit into the oven without touching the outskirts of the oven.
Mm-hmm.
You look at today, ovens are much more larger in square footage. You don't need to do that. But it took that woman in the story to ask the mom and ask the grandmom and to get down to an answer as to why we cut the ends off of the ham. That analogy, I can tell you, sticks true and true in every job that I've had. There's always been a response of we've always done it this way. Just because you always done it this way does not make it right and does not make it valid in today's world.
100%. I 100% agree with that. And again, right, like for the entry level person that wants to get into this industry, that is your value proposition. Like that's the heart of your value proposition. A lot of people have imposter syndrome because they feel new or they don't feel like they're an expert, but they don't realize that. And I've been doing cybersecurity career coaching for the past 3 years. And what a lot of people don't realize is that your value coming into an organization is not the fact that you can, look at an architecture and understand all of the pain points of that architecture, right? Like you're not expected to know that stuff yet. But when you do come in and you're able to just ask the right questions and kind of give those explanations of like, well, why do we do it this way oh, just because we've done it this way before, well, here's maybe an alternative that we can do this, or, that's really, really important for number one, protecting the organization, for enhancing the culture of that organization as well. And yeah, I 100% agree with everything that you said. So, closing out, right? I think that I do have a couple of questions from some of the viewers on Instagram. I want to make sure that I get them. If they're relevant to our conversation, I'll ask them. But if they're not, I'm not going to. So if you just give me a second to log in, I should have had this up already.
When you do that, I'll be right back. I'm gonna step away and I'm gonna move my router. You're getting a little
It's
blurry.
up.
Hang on.
It's up now. Where's my story though? Like, I guess I can't see it on the screen. I'll do it on my phone. Let's see what we got here. Okay, two questions. One of these might not necessarily be for this conversation, but I have a lot of international people who follow me on social media and that are looking to get into this industry. And for someone who's international, in a country like Nigeria, for instance, and they want to get these opportunities to work in the United States, or in a place that has more cybersecurity career opportunities. What would be your advice for that person?
Twofold. One is in order to be able to get a visa as an employee in America, you effectively have to be considered an outstanding alien, and you have to provide skill sets that they cannot find in America. That's why they're allowing to bring you over here. It's hard to do. I've worked with companies where we've had to sponsor employees. It's very expensive. It's very time consuming. Um, it's important, right? Because having diversity is not just diversity of skin color by any means. It's diversity of experience and background and culture. All that plays into what's important. If we stick with Nigeria for an example, Africa and areas outside of the United States, tremendous advancements, tremendous upswings in what they're leveraging technology for. If you look at, I think it's called the Line. I want to say it's Dubai. Don't quote me, or Abu Dhabi, but they're building a future way of human existence, right? They're originally supposed to be like a 1,000 mile line of just multi-stacked environments with artificial intelligence, and all that comes down to the foundations, right? It's network and infrastructure and hardware and software and ones and zeros, because it's all ones and zeros at the end of the day. So if you're outside the United States and you're curious and you want to break into the industry, you want to do something, again, start with foundations, be really curious, use ChatGPT and YouTube and all the resources that are available to just put as much of that data in your head as possible so that when you go and have an interview, you're having an interview from a more informed perspective. But don't just look in America. America is a great country. I've born and raised here, been here my whole entire life, but there is tremendous opportunities in Europe and in Africa and in Brazil and Japan and China. I mean, there is so much. Again, we are in such an inflection point in the world of technology with the release of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. And I mean, we are in very much uncharted territories. So if you're curious and you want to get into the field, I mean, first of all, just take the action, because if you don't take the action, nothing happens. Second of all, be infinitely curious and read whatever you can, wherever you can, and then network. And that network will continue to grow over time.
And then the next question, this is the last one from our Instagram viewers. Where do you see the state of cybersecurity over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years?
So, according to Mike's world, I think that we're in a bit of a pickle. We have nation state adversaries that are doing their absolute best with it, as they called it, not me, as they called a whole of nation effort to displace the United States as the world's number one superpower, to displace the United States economy. The way they do that is by breaking into US businesses and organizations and individuals and just wreaking havoc. I'll give you a couple of quick examples on that. The other day, Pennsylvania American Water had a cyber attack. Pennsylvania American Water is the largest utility provider in America. I think they support some astronomical, like many millions of people across, I think, 14 states. They're attacking water facilities. They're attacking transportation facilities. They're attacking, there was, again, I'll speak recently, I think it was last week or earlier this week, Cloudflare stopped the largest DDoS attack, denial of service attack in history. And I got to a point that it was like 3.08 terabytes per second of speeds and feeds. And they were using people's DVRs to create the DDoS attack, right? So all these devices that you have in your house, your I don't want to say it because mine will go off, but your Amazon devices and your Google devices and your Nest thermostats and even your televisions. I think I haven't read the report, so I may be speaking out of pocket, but there was a 40 plus page report that came out from the Federal Trade Commission about smart TVs and how smart TVs are digital Trojan horses in your house, right?
Yep.
So
I think
I
you
say
sent me
all
that.
that,
I think you sent me that a couple days ago.
right. So I say all that to just give some context for the conversation because 10 years from now, honestly, I don't even want to touch 10 years from now. I think 10 years from now, you're going to have the convergence of really good quantum computing, which if you don't know anything about quantum computing, those who are listening, go watch a couple of YouTube videos. It'll blow your freaking mind. And what you can do with quantum computing, it would take the world's fastest government supercomputer today, it would take it over 1,000 years to do some things, and a quantum computer can do it in seconds or minutes, right? So when you get quantum computing and you combine quantum computing with artificial intelligence, a couple of folks in the know that I've been hanging out with, this one guy gives a great analogy. He said, it's either going to be absolute nirvana or it's going to be Terminator 2. And I said, why Terminator 2? He said, because that's the better movie. I'm like, all right, I understand that. But I say that in jest, but we are at a very razor thin margin of going across a couple of cliffs. So we have nation state actors that are going after water power transportation. If we look at our ports are controlled, 85% of the cranes at the ports are controlled by one of our nation state adversaries, right? And when they started breaking down the port cranes to look at them, they found cellular and Wi-Fi receivers built into them so that the bad actors could have a back door to get into the equipment, right? Now, it was never supposed to be there. Nobody knew it was there. So when I tell you there is an all-out just attack coming from everywhere, right? You can use Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. You could take away the nation-state adversaries and look at the 14-year-old kid with an iPhone that's just really curious and gets ChatGPT to write him a bunch of ransomware. You don't even need to know anything about technology. There's ransomware as a service. You get a credit card, you pay a monthly fee. You go out to a data access broker, you get access to a system, and next thing you know, you have the keys to the kingdom into a million, billion, or $1 trillion organization for $55 a month. And they have tech support if you have any questions. These are things that cybersecurity, we have to figure out how to combat against, how to defeat, how to do better, right? Because in technology and cybersecurity, especially, the bad guys only have to be right one time. We have to be right 100% of the time. And it is almost impossible to do. Okay, 3 years from now, depends on what's going on geopolitically and how many more chess pieces continue to be moved and how much further those chess pieces get moved. There's a lot of weird things going on that I don't quite understand. I'm not in government, but I just don't know that our current government is doing everything they could do to really manage the complexities of the geopolitical landscape right now. You look at what's going on in Ukraine. Ukraine is turning into a combination of drone warfare with World War I trenches, right? So how do we protect against that? It's terrifying what's going on when you see these first-person drones literally toying and chasing with a Ukrainian soldier or a Russian soldier going around in a tank, and then they just finally crash into them and they blow up.
Yep.
Um, what I think people are also not being aware of, nuclear war has always been like the biggest catastrophic thing.
Mhm.
But a well coordinated drone swarm with explosives can be just as bad, if not worse, than a nuclear war. So these are all things that, again, just trying to set the pace of where things are today and where we need to go. So I would say, to be more positive, in the next 3 to 5 years, there's tremendous upside, right? Wearable technology, being able to change home hospitalization and how people get physical care and mental care, and they heal from surgeries or wounds. I mean, it's once in a lifetime. I can't wait to see what happens because it is flippin' thrilling. Like it's exciting, right? Um, Artificial intelligence and what people can do. I mean, you could create your own chatbot to be your own little Jarvis like Tony Stark had. I mean, there's so many upside potentials. So I don't want to only focus on the downside potentials, but the downside potentials are pretty scary, pretty tremendous. Um, so the next 3 years depends on what happens geopolitically. I'll say that we will see a lot more around data protection and data privacy, right? So we'll see more like GDPR, what goes on in Europe from a data privacy perspective. Hopefully, we see more of that in the United States, right? More protection of our data, making sure that the people who have our data are good stewards of that data. They're sharing it only when they need to. They protect it and back it up. Um, but to the point that I mentioned earlier around nation state adversaries going after the businesses, we are seeing real businesses completely close up shop. I'll give you a perfect example. This just came out today. The National Public Data Breach. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
National Public Data was, I guess, like a data broker. Wasn't really a publicly available company. Not a lot of people knew about it. They got breached.
I
2.9
read this was today.
million. Well, what came out today? I'll tell you in a second. The breach happened a little bit ago, probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago. 2.9 million, a billion, 2.9 billion people's records, name, birthday, social security number, address, phone number, all the unique identifiers that we use. On top of that, Change Healthcare was another recent breach that happened. Change Healthcare, are you familiar with that breach?
No.
Change Healthcare, they do like insurance processing for insurance companies.
Okay.
They process anywhere between 1/3 to 40% of every single health insurance claim.
Hmm.
They got breached. Hundreds of millions of people's information got stolen, but not just name, birth date, social security number. They also got all the financial information like banking, routing, checking account numbers. They also got people's diagnosis, people's testing results, people's treatment plans. All of that can be used against you to manipulate you to do bad things if you've got a disease or something you don't want other people to know about. So again, I'm just trying to set the tone for some of that. So what happened, it came out this morning, was National Public Data just filed for bankruptcy protection. They're going to want to either going completely out of business or they're going to be a shell of what they were in the former. And we are seeing actual businesses that provide goods and services to people, not just in America, but all over the world, that are shutting down completely and going out of business and no longer providing those goods and services, all because of a cyber breach, a cyber attack, or something in the digital world.
Okay. That's a lot.
It's the reality though. Like, look, you're gonna get in the cyber, you're gonna see shit you don't want to see. You're
Yeah.
gonna be waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning because something went boom, and your entire executive team is gonna have to figure out how do we unboom what went boom, and then what do we need to do from a regulation perspective and reporting perspective to let people know that the boom happened. And sometimes that's we need to call the FBI, we need to call Department of Homeland Security because we need to bring in governmental resources to help stop the bleeding or to try to get some of this money back. So that's where we are today. That is actual real today. None of, you can look all this stuff up online and validate it.
Yep.
Um, I would also look at the United States White House 2023 National Security Directive on cybersecurity.
Okay.
Read through it. You'll see a lot of understandings of kind of what we're facing, where we're going to go. But I say all that to say 3, 5, even 10 years, it's really, really hard for anybody to predict what's going on.
Yeah.
So I would stay sharp, stay vigilant, make sure you got enough food, water, and things in your house if there's natural hurricane or natural disaster. But you also got to consider, what happens if your local water company goes completely bust or somebody hacks into an oil refinery and sets off a couple of things that make it go boom. These are real, real problems that we're facing today that we have to protect against.
Okay. Two more things to close this out. Number one, pretty easy question is in terms of like emerging technologies for someone who wants to get into this industry. Um, if you could pick one emerging technology to put your focus on today, what would it be?
I'm going to say two: AI and quantum computing.
Okay.
Artificial intelligence is great, but if you're not messing with it and you're not playing with it at least 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, you're going to be so far behind prompt engineering and all these other people. Um, Use it for your own personal gain. I've used it to write me out a workout plan with to lose a certain amount of weight by a certain time, to give me meal preps, to give me a shopping list so I can just go. Those are some of the positive things.
Hmm.
You can literally use some of these things to write destructive code, to give you some hacks. And the only limit to artificial intelligence is the collective you, not you, Kyrie, Mr. Awesome, but the collective you, your ability to ask the right questions. If it doesn't give you the right answers, you are not asking the right questions. And the only way you can get good with artificial intelligence and prompt engineering, trial and error. It's no different than learning how to walk or learning how to talk. You're learning how to interact with now a completely different digital device. And there's ChatGPT, there's so many other systems that are out there, but get comfortable with using artificial intelligence because, like it or not, it's here to stay and it's going to continue to get more ingrained. Quantum computing is really, really hard, very scientific, very physics and all this other stuff, but understand what it is, understand how it can be used, understand how companies can benefit from it on an upside potential, understand how quantum computing can be used for genomic sequencing to help cure cancer. Like those are real things. So get used to quantum computing, understand the basics, artificial intelligence, mess with it all the time. Do not stop. I mean, if you got 10 minutes and you're in the men's room and you're dropping a deuce, get ChatGPT and start just getting used to how you can interact with the systems.
Cool. Cool. Last thing for me is if there's any message that you want to leave to our viewers, whether they are newcomers to the IT industry, whether they're veterans of the IT industry, what would be like a final statement, that you'd want to leave with everyone?
Be curious. Never stop learning. Ask questions. Be comfortable with looking like the idiot when you ask the questions, because most of the time you're not the only person in the room with the same question. You're just the only one that's willing, the only one who's willing to be vocal enough and ask the question. Be curious, be curious, be curious. That will serve you until the day you're dead, whether you're in cyber or in any other area. It will serve you in anything that you do. Be curious and never stop learning.
Very well. Mike, it's been a pleasure. If you want to be found, is there any sort of social media that people can find you on or LinkedIn or anything like that?
Yeah,
Um, if
out
you,
on LinkedIn. I don't really do much of the socials. I'm more of a lurker than a poster for a lot of the reasons that we talked about today. Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, drop me a note. LinkedIn's probably the best way. So please, if you're interested, reach out. I'm happy to have some conversations.
Very well. Mike, it's been more than a pleasure of having you on the podcast. For all of our viewers, thank you for watching. This is the RASOR Center podcast. RASOR stands for Risk and Security Open Research. I hope to see you guys in the next episode.
Pleasure to be here. Have a great day.